Hello, and welcome to AI Ramblings with Neil McWana and myself, Michael Parek. We're glad to have you with us again. Lots been going on here on this episode 12 of our little summary of what's exciting in the world of AI and culture and technology. And Neil, I don't know about you, but the river of news just seems to be accelerating. We don't want to take all day here for you guys, so we'll just lift up a couple of drops and talk about them. I think on the news of the week side of the item, and there's so much to choose from, but the two for me that kind of stand out are number one is Nvidia. Why? Because Nvidia is the largest company in the AI technology landscape. They make the crux of the AI GPUs that everyone uses. It's 80-90% of what makes AI actually AI. Without it, it's just two letters in the alphabet. And they were curbed from selling their Chinese version of AI chips with China because of the ongoing U.S. China geopolitical situation. And Jensen Huang, the founder CEO, who founded this with his co-founders over 30 years ago, he went to DC, talked to the president directly, and changed their mind a little bit on saying, hey, let us sell these dumbed down versions of these AI chips called H20s in China, which in the last year or so, they sold billions of dollars worth of these. And when the curbs were in place, they had to take $7-8 billion in charges. And now with this resumption of the ability to sell these chips into China, it's a good thing. The core strategic importance of this, away from the ups and downs for NVIDIA, is that it secures better America's opportunity in terms of its technology stack, whether it's from NVIDIA, AMD, all of these companies have world-leading hardware and software that are used by companies around the world. And if we chop off our technologies to China as the largest AI market outside the United States, and also the home for half the world's AI researchers, is just going to make their own. And if they make their own, that means in 3, 4, 5 years, the world of AI on a global basis will fragment. That means developers around the world will have a major choice that's not American, that to build their AI applications and services on top of different chips, different hardware, different software, open source, and take a lead. And that is what is the broader significance of this for the industry. And I thought it was a good compromise. I hope to see more, but I wanted to highlight that as one of the major news of the week.
Yes.
And any thoughts on this one bit of news?
I mean, exactly. I mean, we're gonna get into it in a second, but there's growing, conflict both on a global scale and a national scale with the talent war that's happening between all the, big and small companies. We're gonna get into that a bit in a second with our second news piece, but there's also obviously a global kind of war almost happening on the GPU, the compute, because in the end of the day, this is such an expensive game to play. The people who have the best chips and the best access to compute are going to be the people who are able to essentially control the best work. And I think this is really important for it to be ironed out from a U.S. perspective, for us to be able to have access to these chips so that we can actually produce some important work on this side.
No, and I think you put your finger on a key point, which is that the bigger the market for U.S. companies on the infrastructure side, the higher in efficiencies they have in terms of lowering prices for compute. And compute is the key gating factor for companies large and small. And it's literally powering the crazy name scenario in America as well. And this week we saw a dramatic saga where one internet AI coding company, Windsurf, went through 3 different ownership structures within weeks. And this is a drama that, Neil, I think will probably be turned into a movie because this is the 3-4-year-old AI startup, Windsurf, a couple of hundred people, raised hundreds of millions of dollars at billions in valuation. They had a cash bid for $3 billion from OpenAI a few weeks ago to buy the whole company. That fell off track because of the ongoing discussions between OpenAI and Microsoft, where Microsoft said, hey, if you buy Windsurf, their IP is ours because of our broader agreement on IP in exchange for which OpenAI got over $13 billion of Microsoft's money a few years ago. And as a result, that deal fell apart. And all of a sudden, Google swept in and said, oh, you know what? we'll pay $2.4 billion for the two founders and the 40 key researchers at Windsurf, and the rest we're going to cut loose. And so that was a positive, obviously, for a subset of Windsurf founders and so on, but not so good news for the rest of the 150, 200 people at Windsurf. And then another AI startup called Cognition came in. They're also a key company in the AI coding space with a popular product called Devin. And they basically said, okay, we'll buy the rest of the company for an undisclosed sum in exchange for Cognition stock. And so there was a relative happy ending. The reason I cite this as a news of the week is because the dynamics of this changes a lot of the way business has been done by venture capitalists, by strategic buyers like Google and OpenAI, etc. There is generally some conventions on if you buy something, you buy the whole thing, and you give everyone who worked hard at that company an opportunity to make good on their hard work. And by Google coming in and essentially strip mining some pieces off, that was a break. We've seen these acqui-hires, a number of them in AI space. Microsoft bought Inflection a while ago. The latest was Meta buying 49% of Scale AI. But this was different because Google said, we just want a piece of this, not the whole thing. And that changed the dynamic. And that has big implications for AI startups, young people who are looking at working at startups and so on. Neil, your generation must have some thoughts on what's going on here. This is
Yeah,
pretty
I mean,
dramatic.
as we discussed in our last episode, I'm in the Bay Area right now for a couple of meetings, trying to figure out what my next steps are after graduating. Not only does this windsurf stuff set like a new precedent for M&As and how this is being approached by large companies, but even by me talking to a couple of VCs while I've been here, big and small, they've all highlighted whenever I've asked them, because this landscape is changing so fast. Every day that you wake up and look and look in the news, there's a new AI company and a new part of an industry that you'd never thought of before. And I essentially ask all of them, how are you evaluating what you're investing into? And all of them have given me the same answer, whether it's a cliche answer or not. But in the end of the day, you're not really investing into an idea as much as you're investing into a talent and a team that you believe in. And that's essentially what's being shown here, is that the AI talent war, as it's been called, is really where a lot of the value lies, because the people who are building these things are, in the end of the day, I think, more important than the ideas themselves, because the ideas are shifting so fast. I mean, I've discussed it a bit on some of the posts that I've written on my Substack, that things like interfaces, GUIs, are changing in ways that we would have never thought before because of things like AI and AI browsers and the way the whole stack is being kind of flipped upside down. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a very weird time. It's a good time to be in, I think, also just because it's putting more value on the engineers who have probably dreamed for a while that they would be looked at like sports stars, with these multi-$100 million contracts. But I think it flips all stuff on its head, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out in the long run. And if this is a trend that keeps on, I guess.
Accelerating.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it also highlights that if you just look at the big figure numbers, it looks like, oh, everyone's winning the lottery here. But the reality is it's law of the jungle. The rules of the jungle are changing as fast as the technologies themselves. And so I think that's an important takeaway from this. And all of this, I fear, is just beginning, not fully resolved. Which
Yeah.
takes us to our main topic of this week from our perspective. And that, Mark Zuckerberg, who's obviously been a key topic of our discussions over the last few weeks because of his big AI talent moves, which speaks to the heart of what we've been talking about. He did an important interview with The Information where he tried to explain why he's focused on what is being called superintelligence. He's creating this superintelligence lab where he's investing billions of dollars to get a dream team, AI dream team, led by Alexander Wang of Scale AI. And he explained himself in this interview, which is 20 minutes worth watching. We'll put all of this, by the way, in the show notes, including the piece that Neil said he did, which is super interesting to read as well. But Mark basically tried to separate what he's doing with superintelligence from his peers, the other Mag 7 companies, who are all focused on AI for good things, societally beneficial things like AI, changing opportunities in healthcare, medicine, like DeepMind at Google's doing, education, and also just enterprise use, productivity of people, the impact it will have on the global economy of boosting productivity over a long time, etc. And Mark basically said, hey, all of that is very important, but for the 3+ billion users of Meta's core products, Instagram, the Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., it's really about interaction via AI, content via AI, entertainment via AI, companions with for all kinds of purposes, etc., via AI. And he made a good delineation of that relative to the others. And I think and we had a write up on it as well, which people can read. There's a lot more nuance here. But I thought that was a very interesting summation of where we are, of this frenzied effort from change the game, as it were. And we also have a piece that goes into what this means for the other companies on a broader basis in terms of infrastructure investments and a whole bunch of other issues. Along these lines, we also had some activity from Elon Musk on his Grok service, which is, depending on how you rank it, the number 5, number 6 large language model. He introduced AI personas, a personal AI, and from his perspective, which are these flirty characters for people young and old to interact with. And that's resulted in some controversy as well, because whereas the bigger AI companies are being very careful of guardrails and protections for users and so on, you've got this Elon's company, Grok, is basically trying to skirt at the outside of that racing course and saying, we're going to be on the edge of what's possible with this stuff. And so this is an interesting contrast of approaches in early days. Again, there's a lot of reaction from a variety of sources. We'll have links on some of that. But I think this is this notion of personal AI superintelligence and use for entertainment, for companionship, etc., is an important main topic that was worth highlighting.
Yeah, I mean, we know everyone loves to bring up the movie Her and draw a lot of parallels to that. Well, I think what Elon's done here is essentially the exact extreme of where that can be taken. I mean, this isn't anything new. Ever since Grok came out originally, the idea of guardrails was never a thing, it seems, to Elon whenever he's building these things. You could essentially ask Grok on Twitter to generate any violent content. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy recently with a lot of pro-Nazi hate speech with Grok that caused potentially the CEO at the time to step down as well. I mean, there's been a lot of development. Elon's obviously not a stranger to this type of controversy. I think he's very much of the side of any press is good press, and in this case, it's not looking too good. It's a little scary, especially for people at a younger age to have access to this with no guardrails, no parental supervision. It kind of shows, we obviously love to talk about the good ways that these things can be used, but this kind of sheds light on the bad ways that it is and can be used, and it's something that I think everyone needs to pay attention to, because these types of things shouldn't be left unchecked, and hopefully there's some sort of guardrail set in the future.
Have there been any interesting reactions from your friends, etc.? Because this is kind of
Yeah.
flooding the waves here.
Funny enough, at least the people in my close circles, no one has mentioned or talked about this, so it's not something that's come up. And this also goes into the thing of there's just so much stuff coming out every day new from all these companies that it is really hard to even keep track of what the new releases are. So there might be a lag. I'll have to update everyone if there are any updates regarding this specifically. But no, this is just my exposure
Got
to
it.
was mostly through the slew of articles and threads
Got
on
it.
Twitter highlighting it.
Well, I think, Neil, you're right. The flood of news has been incessant. So it may be a good time to transition to our next segment on the show, which is the read of the week. And you
Yes.
have a cool topic here. So if you can lead us off on that.
Exactly. So it's no stranger that I've been spending a lot of time on AI browsers, and funny enough, New York Times recently did a article called "Is AI the Future of Web Browsing?" where they highlight an app that was kind of my introduction to this page, which is Dia by the browser company out of New York. I'm gonna put a pin in any discussion and wait for the our obsession of the week, because one of the biggest competitors and long-awaited releases in this space, which is Comet by Perplexity, just recently came out. I was able to get access to it, so I have a lot of thoughts on how that's kind of shifted the landscape and the pros and cons of it. But for anyone new that wants to learn a bit more about this space, I'd highly recommend the article. I think it's a great read that kind of introduces this idea of how AI browsing is kind of changing our approach to how we access the internet. And I think it's a great read. So check it out.
Exciting. And I've been playing around with Comet, and I know that's been one of the things that you've been focused on as well. So we'll come to that. My read of the week, I love going back to old books that I've read a few years ago and then rethink the framework in the context of AI. And I've been talking about read of the week along these lines for the last few shows. This week, the book that I've revisited and reread is a book that came out a few years ago called Nudge by Richard Taylor, who is a behavioral economist, Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist. And he did some great work on how our economy is impacted by human behavior in terms of nudging people's daily habits in one direction or another. A lot of his work has been taken to heart by a whole host of industries, and we see the influence of his work across so many industries today, whether it's consumer products to how things work online, etc. And the reason this is interesting to me is because in the world of AI, all of these things can be accelerated dramatically using probabilistic AI technologies to accelerate the nudging that we can do through social media, which is what Zuckerberg is focused on in the context of his 3+ billion people with AI super intelligence. And so Nudge was a very interesting book. Another one for a lot of people who want to delve into this, another very popular book a few years ago also was by Daniel Kahneman, which is, Thinking Fast and Slow. Also, these two people were some of the leading behavioral economists that define the drier field of economics with behavioral elements of humans. Both won Nobel Prizes, incidentally, and these are their two most important books on this. And what's interesting is that with the world of generative AI over the last 3-4 years, we don't have new books yet. There was one book that I saw that was written by an academician, interesting, that is thinking through the same frameworks with AI technologies, but we don't have a mainstream book yet. It's probably likely to come in the next 2 or 3, 4 years. What we are experiencing in terms of this exponential change with AI technologies is fundamentally going to be impacted massively by these ideas, by these behavioral economists that has applied to how humans have behaved in economies, and that is going to totally augment plus on a plus and a minus way in terms of society as well. So I thought this was an interesting read of the week.
For sure. Wonderful.
And then go ahead. And that takes us to our obsession of the week.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I was so eager to get to it because there's so many thoughts that I have on this space. So as I kind of touched on a bit earlier, my obsession of the week has been Comet, which was recently released by Perplexity. It's their new offering in the AI browsing space. It's been obviously hinted at for a while, and it's been beta tested. Now it's finally been, slowly rolled out via waitlist, and I've had time to play around with it. And there's a lot of thoughts that I have on it. So starting off, I guess we'll start with a recent interview that Arvind did with Matthew Berman. And the reason I bring this up is it gives a bit of flavor on the way they approached thinking about this, and I can kind of get into the pros and cons of the platform itself. So in the interview, and we can always go more in depth on this in the later episode because there's just so much to unpack here. But the main thing he wanted to highlight was they started building Comet for both defensive and offensive um, reasons, essentially. So obviously the defensive ones being that Chrome is the biggest web browser on the market. It has been for a while. A fact that I love to tell people is that during an interview on MKBHD's podcast, the founder of the browser company, Josh Miller, mentioned that an Apple VP had told him Chrome's URL bar is the most used text interface on all of macOS, which is just such an astonishing thing to me that I love to tell people that because it just shows how prominent web browsers are. And it's something that we use a lot without even thinking that we're using them to consume a lot of our information every day. So he highlighted that they built this, for one reason to combat Chrome, and also for an offensive reason of trying to unlock AI-powered features and agents that can kind of only be done with client-side browsing in the way that kind of unlocks a lot of information because tabs and search history, just contain so much information about us, what we like, what we don't like, that it's high time that it's leveraged in a way using AI, and that's kind of why this trend has been pushed so much. They mentioned that it took them a while to get here because it is built on a fork of Chromium, which is what Chrome, obviously, hence the name, is built upon. A lot of these AI browsers, Dia as well, are all forks of Chromium. So in the end, it is important to highlight tech stack wise that this is all still based on a standard protocol that was created by Chrome and Google. But one thing that he did want to highlight, and it's something that's come up in the news a lot recently with companies like Cluely that that are promising the ability to view your entire computer and take control and help you on tasks. Those, from a technical point of view, require kernel level access on your computer, which for a lot of people is a high, security risk because it's essentially diving into the operating system of your computer and tracking things like keystrokes, and basically every pixel of your screen is being watched and recorded in memory. He wanted to highlight that Comet agents operate locally and only send relevant context prompts to cloud models when it's necessary. They have built this with a lot of privacy in mind. He was also asked kind of about how they plan to potentially monetize this. OpenAI yesterday held a launch for their new ChatGPT agent that they're launching, and it'll be available through a lot of the premium plans that people subscribe to. But he wanted to mention, Irvin did, that they're currently not planning on serving up any ads in their roadmap as it stands. He's highlighted that they want to target time saved as a potential avenue to generate profit, because for a lot of these things, a lot of these tasks where you send an agent off to do something, it does take time and there's intrinsic time saved. So he's hoping that that'll be enough to kind of choose to cause people to want to pay a premium, fee to use these things. And the last thing, I guess, before I'll jump into the pros and cons, and if you have any thoughts as well, is that he wanted to highlight that when it comes to benchmarks with a lot of these models, benchmarks might not be the best way to actually track if a company is doing good or bad in this space. It might be more about how well you own the flow of work itself. So, there's been this ongoing discussion as to who is leading in this race. A lot of people have been, saying that Apple is very behind. As we've highlighted on past episodes, all these companies are doing very, very different things. But in the end, I also agree with Irvin that I think the company who will end up on top is one that controls the entire operating system essentially in the stack. And companies like Apple are positioned in a way where they'll be able to do that. And he was asked, "Are you potentially building an operating system?" And his approach was a very very well worded one, where he said, "Right now we just want to tackle each layer one at a time and be the best in that, whether it's search with just the base Perplexity product, and now with AI browsing at a browser level with Comet. It might be some time before they jump to an OS. I'm sure there's something that they're working on internally, but it just shows this gradual building block approach that a lot of these companies are going to have to take to be able to eventually control the whole stack." So those are some insights from the video. I'll get into pros and cons of actually using it. I don't know if you had any thoughts, otherwise I can go ahead and hop into that.
Yeah, I think I've also been using Comet a lot along with Dia, and it's critical what you say. It depends on what the operating system is, and there are at the moment two major operating systems out there, really, which is the Apple world and then the Windows world, and then you've got this thing Chrome OS in the middle and Android in the middle, and all of this stuff has to work across all of this. And to your
Yes.
point, Arvind particularly, he's being very pragmatic, and I like his approach where he's attacking one application layer at a time. He's also cutting deals with companies like Samsung and others, where his software and presumably his browser will get built into that from a distribution point of view, and he will get very specific access to specific applications on the Android side, and then hopefully on the iOS side as well. And Apple has said that they are also talking to people like Perplexity on some of these potential partnerships. And so that will inch our way forward, it feels like. But I'd love to hear your additional experiences of
Yeah. So this kind of
the
gets into a
product.
lot of the meat of the product itself, which I'm sure is what a lot of people are concerned about more, which is I was explaining to a friend of mine how Comet works, how it's able to kind of go off and do tasks for me. I can ask it questions like, "Help me prepare for my meeting with so and so." It'll check, my calendar and my email, give me a background on the person, what the purpose of the meeting is. And the main thing they ask me is how are they actually doing all that? And this is where the main kick is with a lot of this stuff is from a privacy point of view. When you sign up for Comet and you actually want access to a lot of these essentially game-changing features, you have to essentially relinquish your entire Google account access via an API to Comet. And this is a growing thing. A lot of people always have this qualm of who will I offer my data to. Some people have companies like Apple and Google high on the list, whereas companies like Meta might be lower on the list. So it's all about personal preference. It brings up an interesting topic that I have considered potentially writing a post about is in this world of AI, this idea of privacy versus functionality essentially is that for a lot of these features and functionalities, you might need to relinquish a little bit of your privacy and your account data, in this case, your Google account, to actually be able to get these features that save you a lot of time and then make your workflow easier. And it's something that, a lot of people are going to have to decide for themselves. But in my case, just to be able to try it out and for the viewers of the podcast, I guess I ended up saying yes. I gave it access to my entire account, and it has unlocked a lot of features, as I said, that have kind of changed the way that I approach planning for meetings. As I said, I'm out in the Bay for meetings, and there's a lot of emails and calendar events that have been set up, and a lot of times I'm running from one meeting to another, and I haven't maybe had as much time as I would have wanted to prepare and get an idea of what I need to talk about with this person. I can just open up Comet and say, help me prepare for my meeting with John, per se. It'll scrape my entire email and calendar, and it'll know from a context point of view what the day is today and who I have upcoming on my agenda. It'll give me a full background on this person. And from there, I can chat back and forth and get any updates on what this person's been doing, what I can ask them based on, the kind of goals and verticals that I'm focused on right now. But as I said, this does require you to give access to your entire account. In this case, it's your Google and Gmail account. And that kind of shifts into the next pro con that I wanted to discuss a bit is this whole idea of these AI browsers and them trying to do slightly different things. So the two that I've been using the most obviously is Comet, and then Dia was what I started with. With Dia, whenever you ask it a question, it's very easy to switch back and forth from a UI perspective in the URL bar between if you want to ask Dia itself a question or if you want to ask Google a question, and it'll decide what routes. Perplexity by default routes all the questions through obviously Perplexity's model that they have, and for very obvious, reasons, and they make it pretty difficult compared to Dia to actually switch over to a Google search engine as like your primary, which for very obvious business reasons and personal interest, why would they not, obviously do this? For me,
Do that.
this is a personal thing for me, is that I am not at a point yet where I trust any of these, OpenAIs or Perplexities to route all of my searches through. There's sometimes where I like it, but sometimes where I still want to use Google. So I actually had to dig into my settings on Comet, and it's like several sub menus deep, find what the default search engine is and change it back to Google, because there were so many times where I just wanted to quickly search something. I'd search it and it would send me down this rabbit hole of an AI search, and I didn't know what to trust, what not to trust. And the experience was a bit full of friction, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I did end up changing it back to Google. So that's just something I wanted to highlight, because this is something that's going to come up more and more as a lot of these companies build out AI browsers, is whatever they default. Apple obviously doesn't have a search engine. It's been rumored that they might be trying to build one internally. They might acquire one. We'll have to see how that develops. But for situations like that, obviously Apple has a contract with Google where they're getting paid, several $billion each year for Google search to be the default. That deal might be coming to an end soon. So we'll have to track that as like an adjacent thing. But these are all very important things to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about AI browsers. But the last thing that I wanted to highlight is from a UI UX point of view, which is something that I've obviously spent a lot of time on and I care deeply about. I still think that Dia has the edge over Perplexity and Comet in terms of the UI UX. Dia did a lot of interesting things with Arc, the browser company did a lot of really interesting things with Arc, which was their last browser before Dia, where they really rethought the way people approach browsers from a UI UX perspective. They changed from horizontal tab layout to a vertical tab layout, a feature that was highly requested on Dia and recently added in by the product designers there. They've done a lot of cool stuff with being able to split screens and the UI of how a window will lock onto a certain side. But a feature that I use the most, which was very frustrating whenever I switched over to Comet that I lost, which kind of shows you how when you start using these things, you take features for granted, is Dia and Arc and the browser company put a lot of focus on something called picture in picture, where if you're watching a video, whether it's a movie, TV show, or just a clip on YouTube, whenever you go away from the site, the video will minimize and lay itself over whatever else you're browsing, which is aptly called picture in picture. That's not available on Comet. And that's something that I find myself using so much, and the feature that I took for granted, as I said, that whenever I switched over, it's almost something that made me want to switch back, even though Comet is, from a search point of view and a feature point of view, superior when it comes to AI. Small things like that that improve your day-to-day experience, and in this case mine, are things that are very important to me, and hopefully are thought through on a variety of these platforms. And it's something that I really have to commend the browser company and their team for, because they put a lot of, as much as they may not be leading in their own models, obviously they're not an AI first company, they're a browser company, as the name suggests. They're more focused on the browsing experience itself. So even though they might not have the compute and the AI intensity that a lot of these other companies do, they have done a really good job of thinking through the product itself. So whether that gets brought over to these different platforms eventually, we'll have to see. But those are kind of my main notes and pros and cons after having access to the two.
I think those are terrific and very insightful, especially on the need for transparency and controllability within your experience so that you can change this and change that, etc. And this is something we found in previous waves of technology. Things like Facebook were so simple in the early days. Today, if you want to make critical changes, you have to go into the bowels of the setting and sub menus and so on to figure out what Facebook's actually doing when it's serving up different things in your feed, etc. So this controllability aspect and transparency thing, in addition to trust, is a key piece, and we're very much in the early days of that. And then with the kinds of things you're talking about, which is how do you take the multimodal aspect of interacting on the web, video, audio, web content, etc., and present it all in a consistent way across these systems. And so, this is all very exciting stuff. And by the way, as we're going to see imminently an AI browser from OpenAI shortly. Google with Gemini on Chrome is doing a lot of crazy things, which, by the way, it leads to my obsession of the week, which, if people have known for the last couple of episodes, I've been focusing on Chrome OS from Google and Android. The big thing that happened this week, from my perspective, was the Google's announcement that they officially did confirm that they're over time going to fuse the operating systems of Chrome OS, which is Google's environment with Chrome browsers, on standalone, inexpensive laptops with Android, which is 70-80% of the smartphone ecosystem of applications. The next one, of course, being Apple with all its iOS and other platforms. And so in a world where we're going in and we're talking about AI browsing, where the two major platforms around the world for 4 or 5 billion people is really Android and iOS, 70-30 or whatever the percentages are. Apple at WWDC already made clear that they're inching closer the functionality of iOS and iPad OS with the Mac OS. So they're not going to merge them completely, but they're going to decrease the gap of functionality, file folders, moving windows, and so on. Google, on the other hand, is basically saying we're going to just smush it together. And that'll take a year or two, etc. And it's also, all this is very important because on top of this is going to be built all the AI, was the browsers, the functionality that we're talking about, etc. So, and this stew of things that we're talking about is going to lead us to whatever the AI operating system or systems are in the next couple of years that billions of people are going to rely on. And that's why, we are looking at the formative stages of this evolution, very, very early days. And so that's been an obsession. And I thought I'd highlight that. Again, we'll have a bunch of links on some of this stuff, write-ups and things that people have an interest, but I wanted to underline that. And both our obsessions are different layers of the same deep waters or stack. Exactly. So great to discuss this with you, Neil. And I hope you all found episode 12 interesting on the range of things we talked about. We're going to keep it relatively short this week. half an hour. Again, as usual, if you have thoughts, questions, comments, feedback, please let us know. Like and subscribe if you like. It would always be welcome. And again, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful weekend. And
Thanks.
stay
See you
tuned.
next time.